going on, guys? Welcome back to the BS show. Today we're going to talk about a topic: is the UFC dying? This has been like a back and forth struggle for a lot of MMA fans, because on one hand you love the UFC because they have all the best talent in it, and on the other hand, just a lot of the decisions they make just infuriate people. So yeah, let's talk about it. What do you think?
This is a good debate between Steven and I, because I feel like Steven is on the side of the UFC is on an upward trajectory, and I feel like that not the end of the UFC, like it's going to crash and burn to the ground, but I feel like the reign of being the NBA or the NFL of MMA is over. And my first point is...
That's where I completely disagree.
My first point is there's so many other promotions now that are actually making it a point to try to compete with the UFC. You know, originally it was, well, the UFC is the top of the heap, we can't do anything. You know, I felt like Bellator always decided to take a backstage or a back seat. Well, then you had, you know, the WEC and Strikeforce, they never really tried to be up there. Well, now you have Bellator and you have One Championship who are actually trying to get on TV. Bellator is on TV, but, you know, you have One trying to get on TV. They're picking away, you know, fighters who are unhappy in the UFC, young, good fighters. I mean, Eddie Alvarez, Demetrius Johnson, Sage Northcutt. They named Miesha Tate to, you know, the president of operations. And then, you know, Bellator, I think if any promotion needs the most work, it's Bellator. And for the sole purpose of, it's almost like when people are ready to, before they're ready to retire, I'm going to get one last wind in Bellator, you know.
Exactly. That's like their last shebang. They go to Bellator and do their thing. And Bellator, that's like kind of where they build their name. They get all these legends like Vanderlei Silva and Rampage Jackson and all these people, and they make good fights that they're obviously not in their prime anymore, but they're fun fights that we like to watch. But the reason I think the UFC definitely isn't dying is obviously they just signed the ESPN deal. I don't agree with ESPN Plus and all that stuff, but now we're on like a main sports platform. So I think the UFC's idea, I don't agree with it, by the way, doesn't mean just because I don't agree with it doesn't mean that I don't think that it's good for the UFC, because I understand what they're doing. They want to put it in front of people's eyes and get more casual fans. Now that's on ESPN, they're going to get all these viewers that go to watch football, baseball, basketball, whatever they watch. And UFC is year-round. You know what I mean?
That's
so they're going to see stuff. They're going to see, oh, this fight's happening. It's going to be promoted, and more casual fans are going to come. So we're going to have a lot more dummies watching MMA, but it's going to build the revenue and build the sport, I feel like. And I feel like that's good for everyone. I feel like that's good for Bellator, One. I feel like it's good for everyone all around.
I agree with that.
But it's infuriating at the same time, because the UFC makes these decisions and it's just all about money at the end of the day. So they're doing all these super fights. People are getting title shots. They don't even deserve title shots. It's off of just their personality and how much star power they have. And it's kind of like kills the competitive nature of the sport, you know? But I definitely don't think the UFC's dying. I think it's actually finally got out of its infancy, and I think it's now becoming bigger than ever.
Which I do agree with that. I mean, obviously having the ESPN platform is going to give it the potential to reach many more people.
A lot more casuals, a lot more dummies, you know what I mean?
Yeah. But another reason why, you know, not only there's a lot more promotions now actually trying to compete with the UFC, I also think that the selection for fights, like Steven kind of touched on, is really driving a lot of people crazy. You know, why do we have the top 10 ranking, you know, in each division? Normally, you would have your champion and your number one contender, and your number one contender would fight your champion. Well, that's proven to not be the case. Like Steven just said, Dana White and the brass in the UFC only want to promote fighters who talk a lot of smack on social media, have a huge social media following, or they know can put butts in the seats. I get that. But then we call it entertainment. We don't call it a sport. If this is a sport, you need to treat your fighters fairly. And how long are these UFC fighters going to put up with being the number one contender, a.k.a. Tony Ferguson, and constantly getting jumped?
Or how about all these people who have won the interim belt And, you know, an interim belt means you're supposed to fight for the title. You know what I mean? It's two champions who have the same belt to see who's the real champ. But now people are winning the interim belt. And it's like, nah, we're kidding. That's not really yours.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
I agree. And that's what I mean by...
Colby Covington, Tony Ferguson.
There's a bunch of people like that. And I feel like, you know, for Dana White, he needs to treat his fighters better. And I'm not saying they don't make a lot of money, but I think there's a huge pay gap between your Conor McGregors and then your guys in the flyweight division who are making 10 and 10. 10 to fight,
like
10 to win.
Eddie Alvarez are going to ONE FC, which
I don't think
I've never even seen a ONE FC in my life. I've heard of it. I've never seen a fight from it, and they're making six figures.
I don't think the F's in FC anymore, though. I think it's just one championship.
It's just one championship?
Yeah,
okay.
So get the F out of here.
Punny over here. So yeah, I think if one could
how do they afford that?
Yeah, exactly. So the UFC has the money, but
yeah. Well, that's my second point is how long are fighters going to put up with this before they either one, go elsewhere, two, wait out their contract and go elsewhere, or three, start a fighters union.
See, but that's the thing. I feel like the UFC will beat this dead horse until something like that does happen, and then they'll start making changes and keeping around the people. And the thing, I feel like Bellator and ONE is good for the UFC also, because if these brands build, I just feel like it adds more credit to the UFC. You know what I mean? Especially since fighters from the UFC are coming down into these programs. We see people like Roy McDonald losing to like fighters from Bellator.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think that the UFC, don't get me wrong, is number one. You know, they're the NBA and the NFL of MMA, but I feel like eventually people are going to get tired of treated like crap. They're going to get tired of getting paid nothing, which to you and me it's nothing, but for a fighter to have to pay for a fight camp and all these coaches, and then I don't know if they have to pay for expenses to get there and stay in there. I would hope not, you know, but I just think because on social media, Steven and I follow a lot of fighters on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. There's a lot of unhappy fighters.
A lot of them.
And there's
most of them.
There's a lot of fighters who complain about not making any money. I can't even count how many times.
The wage gap in UFC is ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know, either you're a huge star and you're getting buku bucks, or you're still working your way up the rankings.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And you know, Dana White always says, well, give me a reason to pay you. It's like, you know, these guys are still professional athletes. They're
Demetrius Johnson, why weren't they paying him? He was fantastic doing all this crazy stuff, doing power suplexes into arm bars, and you know what I mean? And let me go on what I was saying with Roy McDonald going down to Bellator and losing fights. I feel like that's good for the UFC. You would think it wouldn't be good because of fighters going down from the UFC and losing fights in Bellator. But I think any time you see more superstars all over, I feel like it just builds every brand. And when all these brands are getting their name bigger, I feel like everyone wins. And then we need competition. Competition elevates everyone.
Yeah.
So the UFC is going to see like, oh, they have fighters who are beating our ex-champion or people who had potential to be our ex-champion. That gives them more incentive to grow. So I feel like it's just all going to blossom and get bigger. We're going to have more fans. The sport's still super young.
It is,
you know?
and that's what I was going to touch on is I think the reason why Dana White doesn't make a lot of changes or he can stay firm is because for every guy that's unhappy, there's a dude trying so hard to get there. So when he goes on, boop, you slip another one in. You know, and you might have a young, hungry fighter who's 22 years old who, hey, you pay me $30,000 to show, $30,000 to win, I'm happy.
Look at Aaron Pico. Aaron Pico's a stud. He's in Bellator right now, and he's so fun to watch. You know what I mean? Just because I think the UFC isn't dying doesn't mean I don't think Bellator has a lot of great fighters. We watch Bellator fights. We haven't watched ONE fights yet, but
I'm excited to see ONE though because supposedly they signed a deal with Turner Broadcasting, or they signed a deal with a major broadcasting channel, if that's what you call it, here in the United States. So we should be starting to see ONE fights, but it's going to be overseas, so it's probably going to be at odd times, or they're going to show, you know,
or
like
pre-recorded, like Bellator does.
But
sometimes.
you know, I love the UFC. I just wish the fighters would get treated better. But you know, there's always two sides of the story. It would be interesting to sit down with Dana White and to get his point of view, you know, and to really understand the pay structure. Maybe there is a reason why there's such a wage gap, but I just think the mixture between many promotions. unhappy fighters, a pay gap, and then pay-per-view. You know, you're looking at how many stinker pay-per-views, just hypothetically speaking, you as a casual fan, you buy a pay-per-view that turns out to be a stinker. You go, oh, I just spent $65. But, you know, it was a stinker. The next one you buy, you know, the fights suck. Oh, man, that sucks. Why is this guy fighting? How many times are people going to continuously pay for a pay-per-view that sucks? Now, back to your point, ESPN's going to help with that because ESPN's going to show more fights. And
look
ESPN
at all the
Plus.
fight cards we have coming up. They're all stacked. I
They
feel
are.
like lately,
Well,
even last year before we
Yeah.
signed with ESPN, obviously the fights have been more and more stacked because they're wanting a fight or
Yeah.
sign with ESPN. Sorry, I got a little gas in my stomach.
Well, Dana White and the UFC is going to have to stay on top of that because $65 isn't just pocket change to a lot of people,
No.
especially your fans like us who are working class people who
live in California where
Yeah.
you know rent's over $1,000 and health insurance is over $400.
So we pay out of our own pocket because we enjoy it. But how many times are we going to do that if the fight cards start to suck? So in my opinion, you have to stack it, especially if immediately when it's over you can look at Instagram and see who wins.
And especially since the whole ESPN deal is to like get more casual fans, the passer buyers who see something and spontaneously throw $60 to see this fight.
Yeah.
Like obviously we're gonna watch these fights because we watch every single fight card, even if it's people that no one even knows.
Yeah.
We're just huge fans.
And I'm horrible at paying. I'll if it's Conor Khabib or you know the first time, or if it's a big time fight. If it was Khabib and Tony Ferguson and he said it's $100, I'm not gonna lie, I would pay it because I'm a sucker. I love the sport, and that's why I feel so much about these fighters and you know other organizations. It's hard because you have a vested interest, but at the same time you're fighting with yourself. You know,
it's messed up too because they're using money as power to control these fighters like the Nick and Nate Diaz. Dana White straight up says these guys are denying fights. They're not denying fights. They're denying the amount of money you're offering them to fight.
Yeah.
That's completely different.
Yeah.
They don't want to fight for chump change. They have a huge name.
Yeah.
Their star is huge. But you guys don't like the Diaz brothers, so you make it seem like, oh, they're just not into it. They don't want to fight anymore.
Yeah.
No, they don't want to get paid. Nate Diaz got paid $20 to show, $20 to win. $20,000 to show, $20 to win when he fought Michael Johnson. That is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, that is ridiculous.
And then he got fined $20,000 for saying FAG on Twitter or whatever it was in an interview.
Wow.
So it's like...
Well, you know, I think, in short, we could go on and on about this video for hours, but I think it's an interesting topic because we're in a love-hate relationship with the UFC. We love the fighters, we love to watch the fights, but we hate the brass. So it's kind of like, you know, a lot of decision-making we question. But we're interested to know what you guys think. If you think the UFC is eventually going to be on a downward trend, or do you believe, like Steven, it's got an upward trajectory? I could see both. But, you know, I try to play devil's advocate and play both sides.
Let's go a little longer. I know the video is getting long, but I want to know what you think. Do you think the brand building would be good for the fighters, or do you think it's just more leverage the UFC has?
Oh, it's leverage, 100%. It's 100% leverage because if they're not paying them now, why would they decide all of a sudden, okay, we're going to fairly, welly compensate our fighters? Yeah. You know, it's just like any business. Business comes first. Whatever's best for the business is always worth more than what's better for the employees. You know what I mean? It's just the way it works. So the UFC can be raking in millions of dollars for, let's use Nick and Nate Diaz for example. They say, hey, Nick and Nate, we'll pay you, you know, $200,000 to fight. But they might have just made $1.5 million on the pay-per-view buys. So they're, you know, granted they have a whole card to pay, and I'm sure there's people crunching the numbers figuring that out, but you have to have a good business model to sustain that. So the UFC obviously is going to do what's best for them.
I agree.
So, but let us know what you guys think below. You know, we love hearing feedback from our viewers on what they think. And this is a pretty interesting topic because we actually do have a lot of viewers and followers that hate the UFC. We have a lot of them that love it. So we would be interested in what you had to say.
All right, guys. Peace.